Looks like we're just going to move right straight into the programs. Sasha, why don't you, if you can, kick us off?
I'd be glad to. Eddie, thank you so much for having me here. Let me start sharing my screen and we'll get the ball rolling. So welcome to our inaugural seminar, ladies and gentlemen. This marks the beginning of an amazing partnership between FACE LA, creating access to resources and opportunities for the Asian American community, and my company, Ivy Scholars, which helps high school students build candidacy and apply to universities. I want to start by saying thank you so much to Hapen, the president and CEO, and Eddie, the chair, for inviting us. We are thrilled to be one of FACE's 800 partners. In addition to their fantastic work in the education sector, they provided almost 500,000 grants to various faith-based and community organizations and saved almost $100 million in mortgages from foreclosure. They're heroes, guys. So this is the first of a series of monthly seminars to prepare both communities to teach 12 to 18-year-olds about critical topics in higher education, especially college admission. Let me start with a little bit more of an introduction. I'm our CEO, Sasha Chada, at the company Ivy Scholars. I lead a company of 20, working with a few hundred students per year. We've helped about 3,500 students since I founded the company a little under a decade ago after graduating from the Johns Hopkins University. Over 90% of our students were accepted to one of their reach schools, and 100% made it to their target schools. 10% of the revenue of Ivy Scholars goes to our nonprofit Laurel Scholars, which works with low-income students from Texas, California, New York, and New Jersey, as well as refugees from Afghanistan, Bangladesh, and Ukraine. I love helping children find a path to awaken their intellectual vitality and leadership characteristics, then demonstrate those on college applications. My job and my company's job is to take everything we discuss in this presentation, combine it with expert mentorship and project management, and mentor high schoolers to help them create amazing stories to tell. So I'd like to kick off this conversation by reminding you that you belong. I'm grateful you're here because this presentation is for you. It's for you, whatever your grades are, wherever your SATs sit, whether you're new to the United States, your family has been here for generations. If you've got doubts, we're here for you. If you feel confident, we're here to make sure that confidence is justified. I'm glad you're here, and I've got something important to tell you. Now let's talk about applying to college. It's changed a lot over the last couple decades. Right here, we've got a picture of a happy kid ready to start a new phase of growth. Who else was this excited headed off to college? And more importantly, why did excitement give way to fear? So here's a more modern cartoon, a teenager crying over flunking her driving exam. Her parents don't know how to console her, and then she mentions how this will damage her college admissions chances. Admissions is scarier now because the stakes are higher. Teens are pushed to get everything right. No wonder diagnoses of anxiety disorders are on the rise. So I'd love to know who here are parents, have a child going to college or planning to go to college. I imagine if I went for a show of hands, I'd see quite a few if I asked who's nervous about that, who's had to help their child with performance anxiety. Kids today are under a different degree of pressure than they were one generation ago. I'm hoping I can help you with that. Let's dive in. Here's what's happening today. Our first topic du jour is about discrimination in college applications. I'm sure you're all shocked to hear the Asian American community does not receive the same treatment as other ethnic groups by major US institutions. Total shock, completely unprecedented. In all seriousness, Asian American students require by far the most strategic consideration in shaping how they present themselves to universities to avoid anti-Asian discrimination. I want to disambiguate that discriminatory phenomena and give you actionable strategies to ensure your child is treated equitably. Then I want to walk you through other important considerations for any parent who's got a child applying to university: choice of major, letters of recommendation, and essays. After that, we've got a Q&A section. So let's start with step one. Where are you applying? For this slide, I focused on universities in California, and boy, howdy, do you have some great choices. It's your job as parents to understand what environments will help your children grow best, and then go with them to visit to see how campuses provide culture, structure, guidance, and opportunity to make sure your kids are going to be a good fit. Let me review some of the most important variables for you to consider. First is accreditation. Every meaningful university needs accreditation. I think we're all familiar with predatory for-profit colleges that hide their lack of accreditation, the DeVrys, Kaplans, Corinthians, ITT Techs of the world. Second, the choice of big or small school is pretty important for students' well-being. Big schools are fun, but they can be overwhelming. Small schools are serene, but they can bore students who want more action. Similarly, rural universities tend to focus students inward on campus life. In contrast, urban universities encourage involvement with the surrounding city. You know your child best, so when you're picking a milieu, ask yourself, how does your child engage with their community? Will a tight-knit campus feel like a bonding opportunity, or will it feel restrictive? When it comes to public or private, you are spoiled for choice. California has amazing universities in both categories. They have an unparalleled public university system, both on the UC, University of California level, and the California State University level. With regard to financial aid, this is the topic of a whole nother presentation that will happen next month. But to give you the short answer, the best thing parents can do to prepare to help to send their children to college is to start studying financial aid policies ahead of time. Next month, we're going to cover FAFSA, the Federal Student Aid Program, CSS, the Private Student Aid Program, run through College Board, the same organization that administrates things like the SAT and the AP tests, as well as university-specific considerations. A couple final points. One is that all parents and students should be researching student outcomes from each university. If you go to the career services section of any university's webpage, you'll find a list of job titles and a chart of average income for students 1 year out and 5 years out for those who didn't attend further education. I think this is really critical in understanding what your child's chances are, given the school they're attending, given their major, for the job market. It does you and your child credit to do the research. Finally, there's one last question here. It's about faculty and academic caliber and prestige. The truth is that prestigious universities tend to attract famous faculty that win prizes, and they tend to provide students access to elite jobs. For some students, this is critically important. They'll benefit the most from this situation. For others, it's more important to find an environment that speaks to them, where they're going to grow, rather than focus on the objective merits of the university. To give you some more granularity, I want to point out the trends of attendance of California colleges and universities by race. So in the far left column, I've got Asian enrollment within California schools. I think you'll find a lot of these names familiar. Lots of Ivy Scholar students focus on Stanford, Caltech, Berkeley, and UCLA, but California has some amazing public universities: UC San Diego, Irvine, Davis, Riverside, and CSU, Fullerton, Long Beach, Cal Poly, Sacramento. You've got so many options here, and it's also worth noting that though they're not included here, the 5 Claremont Consortium schools and Occidental, both private universities, also top the list of amazing California schools. Lots of great choices. Now, I've got a catch for you. In general, California is a tough state for higher education. Most Californians are going to pursue higher education, about 64% by the numbers. This means that in general, students within the state of California have a lower than average admit rate to universities by the standards of the US, but it also means you're coming from an emotionally and an educationally healthier state, one that promotes student involvement in education, a place with a lot of opportunity. But the bottom line is that you're in a battle for limited spots. Let's change from talking about considerations for what makes a university right for your child and start talking about what makes your child right for a university. I imagine almost everyone in the audience has had to fight for their child to get an educational opportunity, and you got more of that in the future. This graph should put a little ice in your veins. It's a graph of how much more competitive top-tier universities got last year. Now, that's just last year, so I'm showing you a 10 to 40% increase in 1 year. It's a given in admission to top universities to see double-digit increases in selectivity in just 1 year's time. Now, compare that to, say, inflation, where double-digit 10% per year inflation or more would be disastrous. So the situation is harsh For the slowest growing universities, admissions will get twice as competitive roughly every 7 to 10 years. For the fastest growing universities, admissions will be twice as competitive roughly every 3 years. And that keeps compounding. You already knew admission to top universities was never easy, but I need to share a more salient point with you. Decreasing admit rates disproportionately edge out Asian Americans. Asian Americans are discriminated against directly in the university admissions process. The highlighted portion on the screen shows you when you've got equal applicant profiles, same SAT or ACT, same GPA, same extracurriculars and resume, Asian American students are 28% less likely to get into the same school as a Caucasian student with an identical profile. That's sad. And what's sadder is that Asian Americans are also discriminated against indirectly in higher education. First, they're shut out of legacy programs that can triple admissions chances to selective and top-tier universities. Those are overwhelmingly Caucasian. And second, and you'll note this at the bottom of the slide, the geographic regions that have more Asian Americans are discriminated against. Universities make a point to admit fewer students from those regions. So this is done in the name of promoting equity, but I think it's a facile attempt to camouflage discrimination. It is great to promote educational access in under-recognized regions, but that doesn't mean you start looking for regions with fewer Asians. That's discrimination. So if you've been following the news, you might be aware of a recent lawsuit of which Harvard was at the center that went to the US Supreme Court about discrimination and race-conscious admission within the university admissions process in the US. Let me give you some numbers that came to light. This March, when our Supreme Court compared an overrepresented minority like Asian Americans to an underrepresented minority like African Americans, the difference in admissions chance, the race gap between African American communities and Asian American communities was 12x. So the same student with an African American background would have 12 times the likelihood to get in as a student with an Asian American background, which is about the equivalence and difference between attending, say, Stanford and UC Irvine. That's a big deal. Now, when you remove race-conscious admissions policies, like some public universities have done, you'll notice Asian Americans thrive. I don't think this surprises anybody, but I want everyone to be able to say real comfortably, when you ban affirmative action, when you are admitting purely on the basis of merit, this is what happens to Asian American admissions. Now, admission rates by ethnicity are starting to right themselves, but discrimination is still baked into people's minds, even if it's not an official part of the institutional process. So the change that started in the Supreme Court case has echoed throughout higher education. Forbes in July of this year, 2023, noted that more universities were adopting test-blind policies for admissions decisions, especially for non-STEM majors. This means test scores and GPA are getting less important, and general candidacy, essays, demographic and profile points, those are getting more important. Let's take a look at what that means specifically for our student body. The University of California system favors admission for Asian American students tremendously. The pink section of this graph in the middle highlights for you the percentage of students admitted. So 30% of UC admissions, 35% of enrollees are from the Asian American community. Now, with the CSU system, this holds true, though to a lesser extent. Asian American students still predominate in that system, but the gap is smaller. Before we go further into the issue of discrimination, I want to take a second to bring a brighter topic to the fore and talk about ways this can work out for you and your child, guaranteed admission to the university system. There's two avenues for guaranteed admission. One's the statewide guarantee. This means you're in the top 10% of the local high school, and you fulfilled the A through G requirements. These are published by the University of California Board of Regents every year, and they describe which courses you got to take to qualify for a University of California school. It's also worth noting that this system only takes account of the GPA from the summer following 9th grade, so the summer before 10th grade, to the summer following 11th grade, which is to say the summer before 12th grade. That is, it only takes account of the GPA from the middle section of the student's years in high school. So for students who had a rough start freshman year, there's some good news here. Now, most notably, this doesn't guarantee admission to a specific UC campus, just a UC campus. Many students who apply hoping for UC Berkeley or UCLA, the two most competitive campuses with single-digit percentage admit rates, end up disappointed. Now, the corollary program is eligibility in the local context, abbreviated ELC. This is a similar metric standard. It uses the same A through G coursework, and it checks the historic or benchmark GPA for a given high school against the UC's benchmark. If students are able to meet or exceed that GPA, they'll be designated ELC and be able to be admitted to a UC system school. So I want to talk for a moment about building a college list. When you're picking the right universities for your children, risk management is an essential component of making a healthy, strong, structured list. This means 1 to 2 safety schools where you know you're getting in, 3 to 6 target schools where you know your scores make you a strong candidate, and 2 to 3 reach schools where you might get in, but it'll be competitive. But here's the rub. Conventional wisdom is that you can gauge reach and target schools by GPA and standardized test scores. But both of these are getting de-emphasized. The move towards race-blind admission also means that the metrics Asian American students tend to do best at, GPA and SAT-based metrics, are becoming less important for universities. The University of California system has entirely done away with the rest of the nation's standardized testing and is discussing creating their own. So while there's a lot to say about building great university lists, a lot of parents feel anxious because the common knowledge, the wisdom they've been using for the last couple decades, is becoming increasingly less relevant. My hope is I can give you some context for this problem. So here's a reflection of students by ethnicity and the impact of grade on admissions. And then I've got another chart for you with the same conclusion about the impact of standardized testing on admissions. The bottom line here is this: GPA and SAT are no longer the main determinants of admission, and they are going to be less deterministic every year. Now, at this point in the presentation, I'm going to start talking about creating a great college application. And in the process, I'm going to talk a little bit about what you can do to help your child make up for this gap, to replace the loss of GPA and SAT or ACT as staunch metrics by which candidacy can be judged, and even without these numbers, to give us comfort, concrete certainty, to make good strategic decisions about how to help your child. Let's talk about picking majors. Major selection is increasingly critical as students have to de-emphasize GPA and SAT or ACT. Universities are more inclined to recruit students who evinced candidacy specifically in their area of interest, and less inclined to admit students who merely look like great all-rounders. Now, notably, majors that students select need to match the activities that they're reporting on their Apply California portal for the UC schools or their Common App portal for private universities. Admissions officers notice and will reject students for discrepancies between stated interests and the interests they follow in high school. It's also incredibly important to note that certain majors have become vastly more competitive. Computer science, business and economics, biology, a classic pre-med major, and engineering in general are majors that could be 2, 3, even 4 times as competitive as the average major within a university. I'd like to show you some more details on this. Let's look into this. If you take a look at the column at the far right, you'll see some real big bubbles. While business is only growing by 7% over the last year, health profession applications grew by 87%, and computer and information science applications grew by 144%. In other words, the class body, the applicant body, more than doubled in a year. These drastic changes reshape the university landscape. The application process for students who want to attend some of these competitive majors now is night and day from students who want to attend majors like English language and literature, second from the bottom, which shrunk by almost 1/3 last year. Let me give you some concrete examples. If you're applying to UCLA for music, you've got about a 20% chance of getting in. If you're applying for arts and sciences, English, or biology, you're around a 14% chance. If you're interested in engineering, you drop to 10%. Similarly, at Carnegie Mellon, the difference is even more vast. If you're looking at the most competitive course, the School of Computer Science, SCS, second from the bottom, you're looking at a 27% admit rate. That's almost a quarter of the IS, the Independent Studies School. You can see the same trend continues at Harvard at the bottom right. Students who are applying to engineering or computer science are on the other end of the spectrum from students applying to the humanities. This means two things for you as parents. The first is that you need to help your child understand their candidacy, not just for a school, but for a major. And this process needs to start not a couple months before you start the college application, before you start writing college applications, but a couple years before you start the formal process. In freshman, sophomore, especially junior year, parents need to be working with their children to understand how they can demonstrate candidacy, especially if they want to get into some of the most selective programs. The second is the parents need to consider what major students are applying to. Lots of students might be interested in two sides of majors, maybe something like literature and biology. These students will do far, far better in the admissions process, applying for a literature major and then developing their degree into a biology double major than they will vice versa, applying for a bio major with perhaps half the admit rate of that other major, and then trying to double major. So now we need to talk about dates. There's 3 big dates I want everybody to know. November 1, that's the early decision, early action round. That's for private schools when you're applying early. December 1, that's deadlines for public schools like all the UCs or other public university systems like UT Austin. And then there's January 1, the deadline for regular private school admission. A couple universities offer ED2, early decision 2. This is a mix between early decision, which was normally due on November 1 and gives students a little bit of priority, and regular decision, which is due on January 1. An ED2 app, an early decision 2 app, is still due at the same time as regular decision, but it involves some of the priority that students get during an early decision app. Often, this is a great chance for a second choice school, where if you're aiming for private universities, you'll apply to your first choice as an early decision applicant. And then if you don't get that one, your second choice becomes your early decision 2 school. The bottom line with these dates, November 1, December 1, January 1, is that you've got to have a safety margin. One of the greatest challenges I see at Ivy Scholars is high school students who've let themselves get right up to the deadline and they're walking the razor edge between messing up a huge part of their future because they didn't manage their time responsibly. I'd encourage all parents to build an admissions calendar with students and to set a deadline, say 2 weeks before the actual application is due, for everything to be submitted. This will lower everyone's blood pressure. This will keep everyone less stress. And it'll make sure that we've got insurance for when life happens and something might get in the way. So let's go into a little more detail on early and regular decision and talk about the optimal path. I've got a comparison here for the classes of 2026 and 2027 of early decision rates. The point I want to make is that early decision is like a silver bullet. It gives you a chance to double to triple your regular decision admit chances, but you only get one early decision application and possibly one ED2 application. So you've got to be sure you're using it right. Early decision applications tend to be binding. Students who apply as an early decision applicant must attend the school if accepted. I think this is a really important consideration for all parents starting the app process with their children because it tells you the order of operations in which you need to address applications and write essays. Students should always prioritize their early decision school first, and then major public schools like the UCs that are due on December 1, and then the rest of their schools, especially the ED, early decision 2, and RD, regular decision, that's due on January 1. Now, notably, applying earlier is gaining in popularity tremendously. Students are applying earlier almost everywhere. This chart is showing you the percentage growth in the early pool. Again, just from 1 year, you're seeing Duke grow by a little over 20%. You're seeing Hopkins grow by almost 10%. Only 2 schools saw a shrinking ED pool. Even for Columbia, which had its ED pool shrink due to a scandal involving the admissions office, they didn't actually see fewer students applying, just fewer students marking Columbia as their first choice. The point I want you to take from this data is that the bottom line is plenty of students will play the spread. That even if they're not picking a school as their first choice, they're applying to lots, and picking a school as their first choice is increasingly central to everyone's application strategy. So we know early decision is trending upwards. It's becoming more common. Early action, a very similar program in which you apply early and get an acceptance early, but you're not bound to the decision like early decision, is also becoming more and more popular. Here you can see the same data reflected for early decision. Guys, I've shown you a lot on the screen, and if there's one thing I'd want you to take from it, it's about being organized with your time. The best thing you can do for your child is set deadlines October 15, November 15, December 15 to have respectively your early round, which is critical. An ED can double to triple your admissions chances to finish your early round by October 15. Then your public school round by November 15 before the December 1 due date for schools like the UCs. And then your regular decision round by December 15 before that January 1 due date. So this is what I'm going to say about timing university applications. I'm going to move on to talk briefly about letters of recommendation. So I've got another fun little cartoon for you here. Most kids aren't as bold as the girl in pink who's happy to admit she's gunning for a recommendation letter. A lot of parents tell me that in contrast, their child's afraid of being seen as a suck-up, of asking for too much, of being seen as arrogant or entitled, but I think this is the wrong viewpoint. I encourage all the students to Ivy Scholars to start building relationships early. Find teachers you admire, who have the bandwidth and desire to mentor extraordinary students. Find time to speak about your dreams with them, to talk about extracurricular activities you're participating in, talk about the way you approach and overcome challenges. I think it's the job of all the parents in the audience to help their children get used to the idea that networking like this isn't dishonest or exploitative just because they've got an agenda for their conversation. It's important for children to get comfortable advocating for their own advancement and to see adults, especially their teachers, as allies. Now, this is especially important because as SAT or ACT and GPA are de-emphasized, letters of recommendation are increasingly emphasized. While they're unimportant for UC schools, they're moderately important for CSUs and critical for private universities, especially Stanford, USC, the Claremont Consortium, Occidental, and more. All students applying to universities that accept rec letters will send at least one counselor recommendation letter explaining how the student performed within the school and giving context to their performance with the rest of the class body, and then a teacher recommendation letter. At least one, ideally 2, from teachers who know them well and can speak not only to their academic performance in class, but to their extracurricular activities, to their character, to their leadership traits, and to how they fit into their peers. So my advice for students who are looking for a recommender is that you want someone who knows you well, who's got a bit of a bond with you. You've spent a lot of time together. They understand your interests, your passions, and sympathize. And for schools that have specific criteria, like schools that want engineering applicants to send in recommendation letters from STEM teachers, for example, that they match the criteria your university specifies. The general trend is that 1 to 2 teachers, generally a STEM, math or science teacher, and a humanities, English, or social studies teacher, submit recommendation letters to demonstrate the student's range to the university to which they're applying, as well as a counselor, and perhaps a coach, a research mentor, a internship supervisor, a work-study director, someone with whom the student did community service. In other words, a member of the community who's in a position of authority, who knows the student well in a class setting, who can add additional critical information about their character and background that wouldn't be represented within purely academic rec letters. So to help make this happen, I advise students to write brag sheets. A good brag sheet helps the recommenders who are writing your letters of recommendation remember specific examples of times you did something great, smart things you said, ways you helped out in the community, the interests you got, the goals you've been pursuing, the times they interacted with you and were impressed. I find so many students suffer in their applications because teachers write letters that follow forms a little too closely. They come off as wooden or robotic. They're templates, clearly. I think it's the student's job to make sure they make it as easy as possible for their teachers to advocate for them. After all, one of the critical pieces of self-advocacy is helping empower others to help you. Students who help their teachers by giving them a brag sheet, a reminder not just of items on their resume, but of the human side that they want portrayed in their college admissions process, help their teachers write great rec letters that reinforce the message they send in their essays. This student's the real deal. Speaking of essays, all students will need a personal statement for private universities. That's a 650-word developmental narrative that tells the story of how a student became the young intellectual they are and gives admissions officers an idea of what they'll do at the university. Beyond that, different university systems will have different policies. For example, the University of California system will request 4 essays of 300 to 350 words each. Stanford will request 8 essays, varying between 350 words and just 25. USC will want 1 required essay and then another 2 optional essays. Regardless of what school you're applying to, the steps you need for essay writing are setting out due dates, starting with your early decision school, due on October 15, then charting your public schools that will be due November 15 before the December 1 deadline, then planning for the regular decision schools, which should be finished by December 15 before the January 1 deadline. Once you've got your due dates down, look at all the essays required for each university and build an essay writing schedule, itemizing the date at which you're going to finish every single essay on the list of universities you're applying to. Brainstorm topics that answer big questions, especially questions you know you're going to get asked a lot, like why do you want your major? Or tell us about your leadership abilities. Make sure the answers that you're brainstorming for these essays are consistent with your brag sheet. If you need to, you're welcome to send an amendment to your teacher saying, I want to let you know I've taken a different tack and my essays are going to be about X, and I'd appreciate it if you could mention that X in your essay. A couple more tips. Once you've composed a draft, read it aloud. It can feel a little taxing, especially because it forces you to listen to yourself, and that can be stressful for adults and teenagers. But it's the best thing you can do to make sure you're holding yourself to a high standard, that you're writing something you're really, truly proud of. Second, teenagers need editors for college application essays. Parents, teachers, public school counselors, private counselors like Ivy Scholars, there's people around who've got the expertise to help and can give students an objective view of where they stand in the admissions process and how to best present themselves. As tough as it can be for teenagers to write essays that are heartfelt and deep and true to themselves, and then take feedback about how they need to change, I think it's essential to understand that this is a communicative exercise. It's not just about students expressing what they want to express. It's helping admissions officers see what they want to admit. So when it comes to helping admissions officers see what they want to admit, I want to remind you that the best essay is one that tells a story nobody else can tell. Something about how you grew in high school that forced you to engage in a struggle that developed your character and led to some expression of your values and an accomplishment, one that admissions officers could bring up. To give you a clear idea here, the sorts of topics for student essays vary tremendously based on socioeconomic status. At the far left side of the screen, you'll see some topics tend towards students with a household income in the 5 figures. For example, material insecurity, abuse, domestic instability, and immigration tend towards students who have families making less than $80,000 a year. In contrast, students who write about sports, travel, tend to be students from the higher end of the income spectrum. There's different challenges for different income levels. And the most important thing for you to take from this is that you need to be strategic about topic selection. Students who are already combating perception of privilege, who go to elite high schools, especially private high schools, who have families that have means, need to avoid topics that trumpet the successes, the great things that have happened that they haven't earned. As wonderful as travel or sports can be, I think there's some topics students need to avoid, and I want to go over those with you now. When students write about music and sports, they tend to say the same things other students have said before them and highlight privilege that's often unhelpful in convincing admissions officers they'll be a great fit. Similarly, when students make a mistake of focusing their essays on other stories, when they focus on injury, illness, or death, or low grades and how they develop study habits, they tend to tell stories that are trite, that are replicable, that might be personally meaningful to them, but they're not new, they're not fresh, and they don't persuade admissions officers. In contrast, growth is the topic I always lead students to when we start looking for a great personal statement topic, something that shows their authenticity, their empathy, how they can communicate, how they grow through struggling, how they react to challenges and change, and how they lead to set a better example for others. If the topic you're picking answers the questions on the right-hand side of the screen, chances are you're barking up the right tree. Speaking of barking up the right tree, I'd love to introduce you to one of my favorite Ivy Scholar students. This is Nika Filipov. I'd like everyone who's watching to take a moment to open up your iPhone or other mobile device, open the Canva app, and use that QR code to go read Nika's story on ivyscholars.com/essays. I think it could be a tremendously instructive example of how a student can do a great job showing their leadership ability, their empathy, their communication skills, as well as their intellectual acuity in a way that defies stereotypes and says something real and true about their candidacy and their application. While that's happening, we've got a little bit of time to take a Q&A here. So I'm going to start sorting through the Q&A that I've got in my webinar chat. The first question I've got is about selection between the SAT or the ACT. And I've got a tip for you that's going to help you guys a lot. What I'm putting in the Zoom chat now is something called a concordance table. A concordance table is how you measure the equivalence of SAT or ACT scores. While universities will accept either the SAT or ACT, they won't necessarily judge those scores equally, and a lot of parents aren't sure how to determine which score is best. This table will do its job to show you whether your SAT score or your ACT score is stronger objectively, and then let you make the right choice about which you select. I've got a question about scholarships, and while I'd love to cover this tonight, I've got so much to say it's going to take a full presentation. I promise next time we meet, I'll be covering FAFSA, CSS, university-specific financial aid topics, and the expected family contribution, the calculator that's on every university website. They'll tell parents what they should expect to pay. A couple last questions. One's about the ideal timeline for an application process. I tell students to expect to spend about 20 hours to finish their first university, and then every university after that is downhill from there. After all, starting to tell your story is the hardest part, but once you've got a couple good essays down, college applications becomes more a matter of editing and reframing than it does creating great original material. So to answer the question, how long should the app process take? How should I commit my time? I'd tell my students to set aside 1 hour on 2 weekdays and 2 hours on both weekend days for a total of 6 hours per week from the start of the summer after they finish 11th grade before they start 12th grade. If students do this, they've got, let's say, an hour Monday, an hour Wednesday, 2 hours Saturday, 2 hours Sunday. They'll make great progress, and by the time their senior year starts, they'll be almost done with their applications. Just a few I's to dot and T's to cross. 3 last questions. One's about the strategic consequences of undecided majors. Is it a bad idea to apply undecided? Increasingly in a world that de-emphasizes test scores and GPA, the answer is yes. Universities want to know what students are planning to do with their education and how they plan to grow at that university. While it's possible to create great answers to this without indicating a major, I think having a major is the easiest way to create a great answer. For students who are picking between a couple majors, I think it's just fine to narrow down multiple areas of interest. And lots of universities will allow you 2, 3, even 4 slots to describe the majors you're interested in. But applying totally undecided, indicating you've got no idea of any orientation, I think robs you of the chance to say that while you're still figuring things out, you've figured enough out to know where you want to go and how you want to grow in university. Now, the final question I've got is about the number of AP classes and community service hours that students should take. To give you some rough estimates for schools like Stanford or UC Berkeley, expect to take between 10 and 20 AP classes, a tall order, I know. For schools like UC Irvine or UC San Diego, expect to take between 3 to 7 AP classes. For schools that are in the CSU system, you should try and take at least 1 to 2 AP classes. It'll impress the admissions committee and make them feel like you're a better fit for their school. With regard to community service hours, I've got lots to say here, but my bottom line is this. Guys, community service is not about a number. It's about the change you make. Students who can write a great essay about how they helped people, made a lasting difference, grew interpersonally, and led others to do the same, will have much more persuasive applications than students who said, I've spent 500, 750, even 1,000 hours, but don't have all that much to show for it. Emphasize results, not process, when it comes to community service, and your child will get ahead. So we're nearing the end of the presentation. I do want to let you guys know that next month, on November 6th of 2023 at 7 p.m. Pacific Standard Time, we've got another one of these. It's going to cover preparing for interviews, planning campus visits, networking, a little bit more about the early decision and application process, as well as recommendation letters, as well as ACTs and SATs, preparing app documents, optimizing extracurriculars, and finally, financial aid. So, ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for coming to listen to me tonight. I'll leave you with this note. First, I love helping children find a path to awaken their intellectual vitality and leadership characteristics, then demonstrate those in their college apps. At my company, Ivy Scholars, it's our job to take everything I've discussed in this presentation, combine it with expert mentorship and project management, and lead students to create standout stories that make university admissions officers snap them up on the first round. We help a couple hundred students per year, and you can see a chart on our impact, the Ivy Scholars difference, on the right-hand side of the screen. On the left-hand side, you've got a QR code in case you'd like to sign up for a consultation with me to learn more. Now, in just a moment, I'm going to hand this back to Hapen with so many thanks for allowing me this wonderful venue. Before I do, I'm going to answer 2 more questions. One's about a showstopper project, a capstone project, the things students can do to stand out for top-tier universities. And boy, howdy, do we see a lot of that at Ivy Scholars. Ivy Scholars students have written books. They have collaborated with nonprofits to help make their missions more effective. Some of our students interested in medical studies worked with dermatologists and rheumatologists in Houston to help create infographics for the 65 different languages spoken around our city, many of whom lack access to medical information in their native language and have difficult making great medical decisions because of that. In contrast, some of our students interested in computer science do research on AI and machine learning, both on a purely theoretical side, developing better models and more efficient algorithms, as well as applying these ideas to more social problems, like addressing discrimination or detecting dangerous behavior in public. The point of a capstone project isn't to follow a specific structure, it's to express a student's value, to show that when they put their mind to it, they've got the initiative, the creativity, the ability to think outside the box, to find really cool, interesting projects that they can make a great story out of. I've got plenty more to say on this topic, and I promise I'll go over it even more next time. For my last question, I want to talk about community college. While we won't get into full detail here, it is important to understand that community college in California is a different ballgame than it is in the rest of the country. Admit rates to UC schools, including top schools like UCLA and UC Berkeley, for community college students are higher than the average admit rate for a freshman. In other words, about 20% of applicants to UC Berkeley and UCLA from community colleges are accepted. This is because the UCs have made a tremendous effort over the last decade to increase accessibility by creating a transfer pathway between community colleges and universities in the UC system. I think especially for students whose families lack the means to send them to universities, community college can be an amazing alternative for 2 years, after which they can transfer into a university in the UC system, get that degree, and use that name for the rest of their lives. I've got more to say here, but that's going to wait for next time. For now, let me thank Eddie and Hapen so much for giving me this venue. It's been lovely sharing what I know with you, and hand the conversation and the camera back to them. Thank you guys so much.
Thank you, Sasha, again for an excellent presentation. We're really honored that you have been able to bring your expertise to so many groups and even on major network TV as well. So again, it's really an honor that you have been able to join us, and will be joining us for some of our future sessions. Again, my name is Hay Pinim. I serve as president of Faith and Community Empowerment, and we would like to just also share some other opportunities, and I've also put it into the chat room. But really, again, today we wanted to have this as a resource to be able to help you enter into college, especially the ones that you desire. And there is definitely a know-how and a pathway. And again, Sasha with Ivy Scholars is definitely a pro and expert in this space. At the same time, again, internship opportunities and being able to be mentored is another area that really is critical, especially for AAPI youth. So I'd like to just share a little bit about this before we go. Okay, so I think you're able to see my screen. So basically, our college admissions seminar is part of our AAPI Youth at Work Career Pathways Initiative. And I think that as Asian parents and Asian kids know that education plays a significant importance and priority in many of our families. And that's why many immigrant families say they came to the United States for their children's future. And if you look on the screen here, you'll see that really for Asians compared to any group, they really shoot through the roof in terms of their educational attainment, whether it's bachelor's, master's, professional degree, or doctorate degree. And, you know, when people talk about education and why parents are willing to really sacrifice their life, is because they believe that it will lead to success in the world. And yet, for the Asian community, it doesn't, our educational attainment does not bring a great return on that investment. You'll see here in the blue that for Asians, their likelihood of being promoted to management is only 55%. For African Americans, 65%, Latino, 74%, and then white, 111%. And you'll see that in the red and in the green, which represents universities and federal government, with all that regulation, there should be less discrimination. And it seems to pay off for the Black and the Hispanic community. You'll see that there's a significant increase, right, in the probability of promotion into management. But ironically, for Asians, it actually goes reverse. It actually drops to 41% for universities and 30% for the federal government. And I believe that one significant factor is actually mentorship and internship and job employment opportunities. And so, you know, the county, we learned, has this amazing program in which 17-year-olds will be, 14 through 24-year-olds will be able to have paid internship with the over 700 employers. And yet, even though we make up 17% of the county population, only 3% are AAPI youth. So there's this big 14% gap in participation. And so we have successfully advocated to the county to be able to be intentional in our outreach for AAPI youth. And as mentioned, this is $17 an hour pay, and you'll be able to get 160 hours for which you could work in person or remote for many of the job opportunities. And the 700 employment opportunities include government agencies with over 40 different county departments, to elected officials, to private businesses, corporations to nonprofits like FACE, and we are one of the placement agencies. And in that, you also get 20 hours of resume and interview guidance. So you're getting paid to be able to do this. So we have launched many of our programs to be able to help you, right? So that you could counter some of these, I guess, barriers or injustices towards the AAPI community, the barriers that we may face in being able to be successful and to be contributing members of the greater community. And so if you are interested, we put the link in the chat room, and you'll be able to send an email to be able to do so. But you know, this is one of the Youth at Work interns. Basically, she said, being in this program has made a really big impact on me and my future. I've learned the necessary skills I would need as part of growing up. This program is essential for every young teenager. So I would like to say, if you have any questions, you could email pathways@facela.org, or else, again, in the chat room, we have put in a link so that